So thank you everybody to be here and to join our little conversation. I just did like a few slides, I guess, to feel more comfortable with this kind of online workshop, because I'm not really good. So it's a little disclaimer, but I'm not really good at doing online stuff, like to animate a conversation. So I really count on you to make it to make it alive, because I will not be the best person to do that. Just to give you a quick introduction about who I am and who's speaking. So I have different practices. The first one is I'm a PhD candidate for the RMIT in Melbourne and for the Design Research Center in Paris. My research topic, like in a broad way, is to look and to try to explore what the digital ecosystem look like in a world that is stabilized at +2 degrees, which means in a world in which we are trying to meet Paris Agreement targets. And I look both at services, digital services, how we are making them, but also to infrastructures. How do we make them and how do we maintain them? So I've been doing like that for a few years, even if my PhD is starting a bit more recently. And I've been looking a lot at how we are actually estimating the inevitable impact of the ICT sector and the digital sector in a broader sense. And I've been trying to, I have my share of work trying to design sustainable websites and digital services. And through that, I have like a few questions that came from this practice, and I will show you today. And I have like few goals. So since we are doing an unconference, I made ungoals. I don't know if it makes any sense because I'm not that good in English, but to be fair, I don't really want to talk that much. I'd rather discuss with you, and I will show you some findings that I had along my way, and also to expand to what we can do if we are looking at the digital sector through another economic lens, trying to get out of gross economics and what it means to look at maybe like degrowth or doughnut economics. But I'm not very good on this topic, so I really count on you to push it further. So I will just show you some findings, and you will tell me if you're finding it interesting or not. So the first one is like I guess it's very little on your screen, but basically I did an analysis of all the UX and UI books that are existing today, like the popular ones, the ones that are recommended to you when you're a student, when you're a professional, like that are recommended by huge UX websites, UX Planets, UX Collective. And I took all these books, the popular ones, and I just looked for the word sustainability. And it doesn't really appear. It just doesn't really show. So there was a first question of why in any of these big books there is any mention of sustainability or whatsoever of natural resources, or just of the material implication of designing a digital service, because it has material implication. We just don't know it, and we are not trained to know it. So it was the first thing that is interesting in the practice, is that there is huge knowledge gaps in the way we are taught about making digital services, but also how we are taught to make digital products on a broader perspective. So I tried to go a bit further with this first finding by doing workshops with like professional designers, mostly UX, from junior to very senior designers. And I just try to add like a few simple questions, like one that is like, can you design the website that consumes 3 watts per hour per 1,000 visits? Or you can just switch electricity by carbon emission. Can you design a website that only emits 3 grams of CO2 per 1,000 visits? You can just switch it, because this question is just meant to just confront a material dimension to usage of a service. And I did this workshop twice in France, first with professionals and with students. And the result was the same in both workshops. Nobody heard this question before, and since nobody was trained to hear this question, so nobody could answer it. So it was also quite interesting. So we are basically not being trained to add another dimension to the digital practices of designers. So I had few questions regarding that, because you can find a lot of things that can explain the situation. And also the first one is to say, like, in the design world, sustainability is something that we've been dealing with for like the past 30 to 20 to 40 years. It's not something new, and yet in digital design, it's like it just appeared like a few years ago. So why are we so late to the party? And obviously we can talk that in the digital sector there's been a huge discourse of being dematerialized, which actually is quite unique to the digital sector. You cannot say that you are dematerialized when you are doing energy, industry, transport. With the digital sector, it's kind of a new thing, like, and an old one also, to be dematerialized, but obviously it's not. It's just been materialized a bit further. And there's also the question of techno-optimism. We assume that through technology, we can always make it better, and we can solve everything through technology, which also can be can be questioned. And also there's a question of economics. All these things are being set up in a realm of growth economics. The tech sector is very well entrenched in the discourses of startups, of scale-ups, of scaling up everything and to make a high growth industry. So what I was doing this research was just to take the segment about growth economics and to try to see what we can understand about digital practices and its connection with sustainability and the matter dimension that we can analyze from growth economics. And also, can we, by looking through economics, can we see few ideas that we inherited as digital designers? So can we also look at the past through the lens of economics to try to find these ideas that are maybe holding us back or making the practice itself unsustainable? So I have like, it's like I would present you something that is a bit of a cherry picking because we don't have time to look at all the literature in design on the topic, but I've been reading back like few like of the seminal books of design, starting from the beginning of the century to nowadays, and also looking at the books in design that are actually treating of the question of resources, because it was my first my first hypothesis was to look at the question of natural resources in digital design and what we can learn from resources in economics that can apply to what we are doing right now with digital design. And in the first book that I found in the design realm, looking really at natural resources, was the one of Buckminster Fuller. And there was this weird sentence, and especially the one I've underlined, which was really interesting for me, to assume that the freely available materials of the earth. How come we can think that it's free and it's available to everybody? And that's actually quite interesting to think that. And so I've pinpointed that, and I try to look in economics where I can find the first occurrence of the same idea. And I found it in the work of a French economist called Jean-Baptiste Say. We assume that natural resources are not part of political economy because nobody produces resources, so there is no production costs. If there is no production cost, then it has no value. It cannot be put in the market system. So as it was explained at the time, so it was in 1803, so a long time ago. So that's why he assumed that natural resources was not part of digital economy, of political economy. And later on, I could not really put it there, but when we think of GDP, it's an indicator on final goods. There is no inclusion of material production, of material resources in the calculation of GDP, for obvious reason of double accountability. Yet it doesn't apply to the calculation of GDP. So there is many levels in economics where natural resources are pushed back, not to look only at what are the final results that have been final goods exchanged on the market. And I assume that in design we we don't actually we don't have any knowledge on resources that we allocate to the way we are designing digital services. So in some kind of way, in my very cherry-picking way, with my few slides, there's maybe something we are sharing with that. We don't account for resources. We never did, at least for digital services. We don't account for water consumption. We don't account for mineral resources consumption. We don't account for primary energy consumption or GHG emission. So it's quite interesting to see that we are inheriting, that we have similarities with that. In a second way, I mean, my second hypothesis was to look at externalities in economics and to look at how digital design is also treating the question of externalities, and also looking back at older literature, especially Christine Friedrich in Selling Mrs. Consumer. I also really liked this quote from her saying that creative waste has been the greatest developer of business and industry. There is not the slightest reason in the world which material which are inexhaustibly replenishable should not be creatively wasted, which is quite interesting because you will find here again the assumption that resources are limited and free, and so we can waste them, which is also a good point to look at the way we are producing waste. We are producing waste because we assume that there is resources to create new products on and on. And also looking at the more recently at the American way of design that was described by Nigel Whiteley as high consumption and rapid obsolescence, and design as social language. You pointed out also the question of waste in design. And finally, I was looking more at the way externalities was treated in non-digital design practices, because we've been doing that for a while. And there was like a systematic study in 2016 looking at the effectiveness of eco-design tools, and that kind of concluded by saying that there was not really efficient to support decision making in the industrial sector. So far it's a semi-defeat or semi-victory, I guess, for eco-design. And what is interesting for me was to understand, okay, we don't really account for externalities in design, or we don't really are really good at that. But yet, how does economics deal with that? And it's quite interesting to think that in economics, neoclassical economics, you cannot really deal with externalities because it doesn't work with the system, with the market system. So, because if you assume that the market is a place to get the better price for both the buyer and the seller, then you have to assume that your product is arriving with the right price on the market, with the right production costs. And if there is externalities, it means the production costs are not right. So it means the allocation of the prices will not be right too. So since you cannot deal with that, you are just taking the cost of this benefit, the externality, which can be negative or positive, to someone who's external to the exchange. So that's why you are calling it an externality. And because of that, since it cannot really be integrated in economics, it's really hard to do it in other practices. If you are, I mean, if you are working in a business model in which you are actively based on the fact that you cannot integrate externalities, yet it will be really hard to apply tools that try to internalize that. And with digital design, it can be quite the same. With digital services, it's harder to see, but with digital products, it's interesting to see how what we assume that the best design products. Obviously, we can talk about Apple products. So designed with no consideration to wastes or to recycling, or this a weird way of recycling, but yet always increasing the flow of goods you are putting on the market, which is not really answering the question. And yeah, and when we speak about digital services, we are just seeing like increasing growth of traffic when we look at web traffic. So far, we really not been able to manage the consumption and the impact that has this traffic on the production of new hardware, of new software, and the increasing obsolescence of this hardware caused by the software. And we're still not really good at thinking of that, to be fair. So when we look at the digital design sector, it feels like there is so much things to do yet, because maybe we not even have started to go in one direction, but at least it's good to know where we are. And I really want to stop talking now. So I just like put a few questions that I had in my mind when I was doing that. Is like, can even digital design be sustainable in growth economics? Is a good question for me. Like, it's a big one. And even what about digitalization as a whole? And if we think of other models, how can we think of the digital sector in degrowth economics or in feminist economics or in steady state economics? I don't know. And to put it in a very practical manner, like what will it take, for example, to design a smartphones that will last at least 10 years? Because it's not only a hardware issue, it will be a software issue. It will be also an issue on the way we are thinking of digital services and the calculation powers they demand and the memories they demand and so on. So there is many questions that are unanswered on the topic, and now I will stop talking and let's exchange. And I hope it was not too long, and I hope everybody could understand.
So I just wanted to say, yeah, are you going to keep the slide up for us to discuss around it, or?
Yeah. To show the slides, right?
No, I mean, just wondering if you wanted to keep the question on the screen, or what you'd like. Because I just wanted to say thank you for that. There's a lot to think about in what you were presenting, and I know a lot of people here are going to want to have some discussions around it. Just very quickly, from my point of view, I think one of the things that was quite interesting in the framing around digitization when it was a thing that was starting to happen was this idea of what we called the paperless office, and this goes back a long way, but paper was seen as the real kind of danger. You know, if we could stop producing so much paper in our work, then things would be better. So this jump onto things like email and digital services for me was a kind of reaction to that. So I think it became quite unquestioning. That's just, so going down that route that it was better than paper and therefore it was better, whereas actually not questioning what the impact of digital services is on the world. Just a kind of an observation. I can see Joanna's got her hand up as well, so she might want to say something here.
Yeah, hi, Gauthier. Thanks so much for your work on this topic that I've been following for a while. Really useful. I'm sorry I can't turn my video on for some reason, but I just wanted to respond in terms of why it is that sustainability hasn't really been picked up in this sphere. And I think it's follows from why in my own design discipline and communication design, we've also been slow. And I think it's just the way in which the material impacts of sustainability are more evident in some design disciplines than others. And it seems to me that architecture was probably the first, and product design were the first two design disciplines that really got really took on board the sustainability challenge, because it was very evident how their practices had material impacts. Whereas digital design, communication design, it's less evident. It's more about the things that people do, the different types of ideas that people have. But with a digital design, it's even more difficult, because it is sort of the intersection of very dematerialized seeming like interactions, but also just the fact that energy is, I mean, the most of the impact is energetic, and also around all of the resources in the infrastructure of the digital services. But all of that is so invisible and so difficult for people to understand. I mean, energy, people's understanding of energy is very, energy literacy is really not very, it's not very well developed, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of just like, it's a big black box in it. So I think that this work that you're doing is really like really important. I don't know, that's not saying anything too revelatory, but I just wanted to start with that.
Well, thank you. Now I meant to send you an email soon. So I saw like someone also raised hands, but maybe I missed it. But you're all welcome to. I don't know. I didn't set up rules for this discussion, but I guess you can raise hand and just talk, or you can just talk. I don't know. Really bad at this.
Just talking is good. I think it's working. I'm just wondering if, because I'm thinking about people here who actually work in the industry, obviously apart from you, Gauthier, anybody here who's working in sort of digital services specifically, and I'm going to mention this because I wonder if Dan might have something to sort of say about it. You know, is there any discussion within the work that you're doing in a sort of practical day-to-day sense around this kind of energy consumption or sustainability in digital services? I don't know if anybody had a view, and that'd be interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, sadly not, Simon. From my perspective, I mean, it's kind of a, you know, I mean, I'd even love to say it's the next step, but really, you know, I mean, in government design, I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, we're still in such early stages with it, you know, even having any influence in public services, really, despite all kind of like the bluster about service design in government. In the departments, it's still really hard. So, you know, we're still kind of in a position where, you know, thinking about moving away from paper forms and how digital services seem more sustainable, even though they're not. And, you know, it's something that we really need to move towards.
Yeah, there is something interesting with the paperless discourse. I was visiting a waste recycling facility recently in France, and they were showing me like the different flows of waste are treating or recycling. And obviously the flow for newspapers, magazines, and so on have decreased a lot. There is no doubt about that. But there is a new flow that appeared at the same time, which is the flow for like paperboard, basically all the boxes coming from online ordering online, all that just compensate for all the papers that have been decreasing in the first stream. So at the end, we're just staying at the same level of waste being recycled as the center, which is like 50,000 tons of waste. And at the end, but nothing changed. It's just displacing a lot of things. But at the end, I mean, in France, when we're thinking about this question, we're thinking of Paris Agreement targets, which means for us to reduce our carbon footprint by 4 in 2050, which is 4 to 5 to be fair. And when you think about that, you think like, okay, there is most of the things that we do today are not fitting that. So whether it's good or not at the moment, we still have to reduce it. And the thing is, just staying in the same level is not good. So how do we move to that? And I've been designing digital services with that in mind, which is where there's a chance in France that is becoming like a huge topic, and we just passed a new bill that will that makes mandatory for engineer students and design developer students to learn about digital sustainability and digital sobriety. So it's moving forward, but yet you also have the question of discourses about. I was seeing in a chat from. Sorry if I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name too much. Kshama Nagaraja. Sorry. That there is also the discourses around AI, blockchain, and so on coming in. And recently there was also first about Bitcoin and NFT and so on. And at the same time, in the design field, whatever your practice, you get to be more and more digitalized. I mean, even if you're doing communication design, you spend your time on Adobe software suites. And so at the end, we just, maybe we'll all kind of end up being digital designers, whatever the outcome of our practice. And that's why for me, it's interesting to look at actually what it means in terms of material implication, because we'll kind of all end up with the same systems at the end.
Yeah, totally. You know, I think as well in design, you know, there's a big knowledge gap that we have. I mean, designers in government certainly, between what's you know, happening in terms of you know, kind of like DevOps and development architecture and stuff like that. So we've got like a multi-cloud hosting strategy where we use Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud, and each service within that, you know, kind of like interrelates. I mean, I've got no idea about it really. So it'd be interesting to know really. I mean, surely those cloud services output carbon emissions based on the amount of data that you're pushing through it. Can you really tally the two up? I don't think designers really, we don't really tend to be able to convert our thinking from, you know, offline sustainability and digital.
That's one segment of my research, and I guess it's also part of shifting the economic model that is behind it, is when I'm working with the state or with national agencies or with any kind of clients, one of the first steps of my practice is asking, like, should we even digitalize? And how can we assess if we should digitalize or not? And even if we should digitalize, what are we losing when we are doing that? Like I use a classic example. I've been also working more for rural areas, so I'm using this example because of that. But when you are replacing a post office in a village by a dematerialized solution for emails and post packages and so on, you're not only dematerializing like the fact of receiving or sending letters or packages. A post office is also a place of sociability in a village, and when you are digitalizing, you're also losing that. And it's not, and you just have to be like straight when you are like, just have to say, okay, we'll do that. We know we're gonna lose that, and we'll do it. But we know it. We know that we lose it. And I just want people to be honest with that. And there is a third way that I've not been pushing very much right now, but is kind of gaining traction in some research groups in France. Is about undigitalizing, which is a bit very forward compared to what we are right now, but is actually looking at processes of digital services that are already existing, and to go back to physical places, which means we don't erase the digital solution. It just means we are going back also to making a physical place, because we cannot address everything with a digital service. And actually, we are doing that all the time, but I think we are ideologically set up not to think about undigitizing things, because it feels too weird for us. But even if you think about Amazon buying brick and mortar shops to do like facial recognition, payment, whatsoever, it's still some kind of undigitization in a weird way, going from the digital to the material place again.
Just very quickly on the whole Amazon thing, what I think is really fascinating is the way that they've used digital to kind of gain a market domination and put out of business the sort of bricks and mortar businesses, and then going back into those brick and mortar businesses. So actually, it's been kind of maybe obviously a strategy from the beginning, but quite recognizing that even themselves, it doesn't achieve everything that they need to achieve, and so part of the plan was always to kind of maybe go back to that. So it's an interesting thing to watch from as other people in digital services, I think.
But and then, to be fair, from all sectors, I think maybe the digital sector is one of the most opaque I've ever met. It's so hard to get any kind of data. That's quite amazing. But for a sector that is about data, there's basically nothing about their own physical presence. It's so hard to get, like Google cloud provider services. It's impossible to get info.
So Joanna has a hand up.
Yeah. Just following that, this idea of it being opaque, but also the sort of alienation of like the experience of being online and using digital services when you're just so removed from really understanding just how the sort of material impacts and just the complexity of everything. And that's why I think this has been so underdeveloped as a domain for sustainability in design, just because it's just beyond the capacity for most people to really get their heads around, and why really we need just like so much more work in this area to help people even begin to understand. But when you start to sort of broach that area, I wonder if like the strategies that designers have used in other domains could be put to use here. Like one of your questions is efficiency the best option? And it seems to me that like that's what the cradle to cradle people were asking a couple decades ago, and they were like, no, efficiency isn't it, it's like effectiveness. They were like effectiveness, and then as opposed to efficiency, and efficiency was in the sort of like was just like doing things a little bit better rather than like actually trying to sort of do something completely different. But then also all the other sort of strategies of like, we just haven't even really entered into the realm of like really being able to judge what is like ineffective in this space, because we don't really like, we don't know like what are the big problems. Even your work sort of making that evident to other communities is just hugely valuable. I mean, because I remember a presentation you did before where I saw some of your comparisons of energy use in different areas, and so in digital services. And I think that that's like, because it's just so difficult even for people who are very passionate about this to know, okay, how much, what's the impact of my use of this particular service? What's the impact of like, you know, putting all my music on the cloud, or all, and you know, all of these things. It's just like we have no means of judgment, but like, you know, the kinds of strategies that have happened, like just like, you know, the sort of certifications, the ratings, all of the different things that have happened in other domains haven't really happened here because, I don't know, there just hasn't been the infrastructure. There's been no institution, no sort of, it just seems to be very underdeveloped.
Yeah, and to go in that direction, the fact that we don't really see what can be effective, not effective, but what can be the most sustainable choice in terms of designing digital services makes it very easy to greenwash. It's very, very easy to do a very nice greenwashing by doing a sustainable website or by claiming to do some kind of sustainable website. And obviously you will not change anything in your actual economic model. So a recent example was Volkswagen doing like kind of ecological website to present SUV, which is kind of the ultimate example of greenwashing using digital sustainability. But and that's the thing, like in France now, like everybody, like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, Accenture, everybody is starting to get into digital sustainability because there is money, and everybody will set up a methodology, and nobody really knows if it's good or not because it's super hard to assess. And there is few practitioners that are doing good research, but nobody's sure. Like if you're a researcher, it's really hard to be sure of anything to start with. And in such an opaque sector, maybe we'll get like some very trustworthy data in 5 to 10 years. And maybe because some industrials or manufacturers will finally open some data. But that's it. I mean, so now we have to make use of old data, or not that recent data, and to make some wild guesses, which is not that good as a practice. But for example, with my students, we did some workshops testing like what will we need to make a smartphone that lasts plus 10 years. And you will quickly realize that it's not really about like any technical improvements. It's like first is politics. It's just like you need like to set up a bill in which you are providing your warranty, in which you are setting up a new framework for updating, like for security updates, evolutive updates, and so on. And you need like a carbon tax at your border when you are importing electronics. So it just goes beyond so much just making a smartphone. Like durability of this kind of products is so much beyond hardware. And that's an interesting point. And software is a big part of that, but it's not the only one. We use technologies just not to get into politics while being right in the middle of politics. And you get to, I mean, from my experience, I've been like in a lot of expert committee with many industrials with their own numbers. And it's really hard to convince people in a sector in which is like kind of the new house for growth economics, also the new house for progress, and also maybe the salvation for humanity if with renewables and so on. And it's really hard to talk about sustainability in this setup. It's also like quite a big questions for me, like how do we discuss about it? Because it's not really might be one of the hardest sectors.
I think there's I mean, yeah, there's so much to think about. One of the things that I think is kind of I was thinking of when you were talking was the whole thing around recycling, you know, how people recycle in their homes, and how much that's grown compared to where it was a few years ago. And yet at the same time, there's still a huge confusion around recycling and actually whether or not recycling has actually got any benefit, you know, because of the amount of energy required to reuse various materials. And yet it kind of happens anyway, and people don't necessarily know the reality of the impact of it. So it's quite interesting to see the disconnect. That something can happen even when there's a massive disconnect between your real understanding of the impact of it and what you're doing. So I kind of, it's just a thing to reflect on, is like what's required to make people think about this sustainability in digital services, even though the actual data and the science behind it may be confusing and difficult to access. Is still the thing that kind of people might do, you know.
I mean, like, I remember a report of the European Environmental Bureau saying that, like, it was a wild calculation, but it's just good as an image, that saying that a smartphone should last at least 25 years in order to be in order for the impact of the manufacturing to be absorbed by an ecosystem. So just think of a 25 years long smartphone. It means that you might have like 3 smartphones in your life, which is kind of a weird thing to think about already. Like maybe we'll be just entering like the iPhone 4, I guess, with this product cycle rate. And that the thing is, we need to slow down, and it's really hard to slow down such an accelerating industry.
Yeah, the Kashama's just saying in the chat, it's also a cool notion. The idea of presumably the idea of a phone that would last 25 years, and actually there's a role that design has in that, isn't there? In this kind of expectation of what's normal, of what's, you know, acceptable.
But also most of the impact, like when you think of any object like a smartphone, like most of the impact comes from the manufacturing. I mean, like 85% of the energy is already being consumed before you are buying the phone. The 15% left is just you plugging in every day for 3 years, and the resources are lost, and the water is lost, and most of the impact are not where they are consumed. It's like we don't have a lot of mines of mining sites in Europe. There is also like a question of colonialism behind that, of who's feeling the impact of that, both of manufacturing and both of disposal. And there's another question that, like this industry, like when we think of this industry, we feel like so disconnected of material condition of production. Like right now, I'm studying like the drought that is happening in Taiwan, because it's heavily impacting the semiconductor industry, manufacturing industry, which means like no, basically all electronics will be delayed by. I've seen like recently, like just for routers, it has been delayed by 60 weeks for shipping, because basically there is no more water in Taiwan because there's no typhoons this year, and a manufacturing plant for semiconductors need at least like 160,000 liters of water per day to maintain this protection. So there's been like lines of trucks, of water trucks, just pumping water in the manufacturing plant. And if we don't have semiconductors, there's nothing left in this sector. So that's also quite interesting how we think of how we'll adapt our industry regarding increasing climate change. And that's also a huge question for me. And because we don't really think about it that much, because the water trucks coming to the plants, I don't even know where the water is coming from. And you got into all this huge supply chain, in which like Anat-Singh is quite a good book. maybe there is a lot to take from Anat-Singh looking at the digital industry. She's the author of the mushroom at the end of the world. If people know, it's really good book of anthropology. I can write it down. And yeah, I've been talking a lot at the end. I was supposed not to talk.
It's been really, really interesting, Gauthier. I think there's a lot more to obviously explore with this. And I just want to sort of say thank you. And this is a question here from Andres, actually in the chat.
Hello, Andres. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you. That's a good question. I mean, like, for example, there is a lot of debate in France about 5G. And there is one question that is interesting is, how come is French operators that are building an infrastructure that's going to be used at least like by 70% by American services, which is most of our traffic is from American services in France. And also at the same time, the services will not pay any taxes in France, or I guess it's 0.3% flat tax, compared to a French telecom operator, which is around 7%. So obviously, I guess there will be it will be much more interesting to get like a normal tax for GAFA. Even if there is no question of ecological impact, it will be good to have like every country paying the same every company is paying the same rate, especially because now there is Amazon warehouse or popping out everywhere in France, getting the new employment for people. So yeah, and they also are benefiting from huge tax cuts to get to implement new warehouses in France. So it's not even tax haven, it's also what you will do to get the GAFA in your backyard. I need to send you an email also later. I might come to Barcelona.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say something.
And maybe if you want, the German colleagues just published an issue about ecological economics and sustainability. I mean, digitalization and ecological economics, looking especially, there is an article more about digital cross-independent societies. And that can be also interesting, and but also tackling more on the question of employment, productivity, and less about digital services itself. But also interesting paper. I will share it to you too.